Thank you for joining us. My name is Andrea Bassing-Matney, and I am the Community Outreach Programs and Support Specialist for Research Services at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. A few quick notes before we start. The speaker will answer questions allotted in a 10-minute Q&A session at the end of the talk. You can submit your question for the presenter via Twitter using the hashtag GenFair2014. For captioning, go to the Virtual Genealogy Fair website and click on the link for today. The lectures will be recorded and posted on the Virtual Genealogy Fair website by the end of November. Lecture number 7 is entitled, What's New at Ancestry from the National Archives, and our speaker is Quinton Atkinson. How does Ancestry work with the National Archives and Records Administration to get records digitized, and what are some of the latest collections from the National Archives to appear on Ancestry? This presentation will look at some of the long-term National Archives collections, hidden gems, and even some sneak peeks. Quinton is the Director of Content Acquisition and Partner Development for Ancestry.com. I will now turn the microphone over to Quinton. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. This is truly a privilege to be here at the National Archives. I have been working with the National Archives for a number of years and been involved with the Genealogy Fair, and have to say that this is probably one of the most progressive, innovative genealogy sessions that I've been involved with. And it's impressive to me that given a couple of years ago, as the National Archives was preparing for this particular genealogy fair, changes in the setup led to a delay of the on-site genealogy fair, and a few months later I saw that the National Archives had found a way to bring that same programming to anyone and everyone that wanted to be able to view it. And so to see it 2 years later in this setup running smoothly with so much interest and interaction from the community is really a tribute to the National Archives and the efforts that they have put into trying to make available information about collections at the National Archives that are invaluable to family history research, which is where Ancestry comes in. Ancestry.com is the largest online resource for family history research, and without the National Archives and the resources at this facility and their facilities around the country, we wouldn't be able to offer nearly as much information and records and documents that we are able to now. I also want to say that, as Andrea mentioned, I'm the Director of Content Acquisition for Ancestry, and as such, I'm able to travel a bit around the US and around the world in meeting with archives. Sometimes my wife doesn't believe that I'm actually going on a work trip because it's kind of hard to explain what I do. And this, for me, is really the first opportunity where she could actually see that I'm working. So I invited her to view this presentation via YouTube so that she could actually see that I do more than just travel on an airplane and stay in a hotel. This is where she'll probably tune out because I'll start talking about genealogy, but this is proof that I'm doing work. Although it doesn't really feel like work, this for me is a pleasure to be able to talk about what we do and a bit about our company. I'll jump in and show you where we're headed as we go through this presentation. Ancestry Background, for those of you that aren't familiar with Ancestry, we've seen a huge increase in the number of people that are newcomers to the hobby of family history research, and so I'll share a bit of a background about our organization. We'll talk about how Ancestry works with the National Archives. We get many questions through our own channels about what we do with the National Archives and how we're working and how we identify the records that we end up publishing on our website. So I'll try to provide some insight in that area. I'll also talk about some long-term projects, multi-year projects that we are working on as we try to bring more and more digital content to our website and to the National Archives. Collections that we've added recently to our website. We add new content every week, and some of those collections I'll touch on and be able to share with you what we have recently added to our website. and maybe some collections that you haven't seen or haven't heard about that I think are wonderful hidden gems within the content of the National Archives and the content of our website. And if we have time, I'll talk about some collections that you may not be aware of that will be coming to our website and will be digitized and available through the National Archives. And then obviously at the end, we'll go through some questions. So let's jump into a bit about Ancestry and what we do. We've spent about 20 years in the digital space. Prior to that, Ancestry started as a book publishing company in 1983. And about 20 years ago, we started putting documents on the internet and allowing those to be searched and allowing people to start doing online family history research. And during that time, we've spent about $250 million in digitizing and indexing and making those records available via the internet, via Ancestry. If you look at this picture, you may not be able to see the details of these logos, but I'll point out some. There's obviously the National Archives of the US, NARA. There's the National Archives of England and Wales. There's the National Archives of Canada, and then various other governmental, private, corporate archives around the world, everything from a state archive in Alabama to British Telecom in the UK to the Shanghai Library in China. All have resources and documents that are important to family history and that allow people to discover more about where they came from. Now, the types of records we focus on, it's really quite a simple formula. We're looking for documents and records that have a name and a date and a place. And hopefully there's some additional information that provides relationships and stories and insights into an individual's life. So with that criteria in mind, you can look to the right of this image and see that we look at census records from wherever we can find them, immigration records, records from World War I and World War II, and any conflict, because it seems that conflicts produce documents identifying where people are and what happened to them and where they were transported to and the benefits and hospitalization that happens after these conflicts. There are family and local histories, slave narratives, newspapers that provide amazing stories about ancestors, especially in local small towns. We also have maps available and city directories and then county and church records. Many of the counties across the country provide marriage records and wills and other more localized documents. And even some fun things like yearbooks where you can go and look and see what your great-grandfather looked like while he was attending school. Ancestry is a growing global business. We have websites for 8 different markets, meaning we have websites in various languages. And we've increased our focus in providing records from around the world. We have over 1 billion records from 67 countries that were launched just this year. So there's an effort to spread out from the US and from Canada and try and identify records and documents from countries around the world. You'll see the flags for Canada and Mexico and Italy and France and the United Kingdom and Ireland, Germany, Sweden, and then Australia are the areas where we currently have websites that records and documents are coming from. As we move on, you may be familiar with some of these websites and properties. You may not have known that they are part of Ancestry, but Fold3 is a partner with the National Archives as well, focusing on military records, especially military records in the US. And the majority of the records on this website come from the National Archives, from the holdings in Archives 1 and 2. Archives.com is another website that's part of the Ancestry family. It is another way to provide simple and easy access to family history records, and many people that are looking for a specific record or a specific document use archives to do that. Another growing property is newspapers.com. As I mentioned earlier, you can come to Ancestry and find some name, date, and place information and some stories, and we expanded that to provide even more stories that are available through newspapers. To the right, you can see a graphic for Find a Grave, which is a community-based website that is really evolved around a volunteer community that goes out to graveyards and snaps photos of those gravestones and uploads them to the Find a Grave website, and then the community is able to index those and make those available. And there are millions of names and images available through the Find a Grave website. And then you can see at the bottom an interesting Ancestry DNA. It's the fastest growing DNA service related to family history that's available. And it's been fascinating for me to take that DNA test and to find out my ethnic makeup and some percentages around how much of me is Greek or Scandinavian or African, 4%, if you want to know. We have some amazing stories and interactions when you take an Ancestry DNA test. So those are some of the properties that are part of the Ancestry family. Just a quick content by the numbers. As you look at Ancestry, the website, there are, it says 14 billion there. I just got an update yesterday where we now have 15 billion records that are available on Ancestry, and over 8 billion member-to-member connections, meaning people are getting on the website and they are making a connection with someone else on the website and recognizing that they have common ancestors. And then there are trees, over 60 million trees, electronic online trees that people have created as they enter in information about themselves and their family members. And within those trees, there are about 6 to 8 billion individual people in those trees as people upload information. And as you can see, that number from 200 million, again, an update yesterday I received, it's now at 250 million images and stories are being uploaded by the community who are interested in sharing what they know about their family members with other people. And altogether, we average about 2 million records being added to the website daily, and a great portion of those records come from the National Archives. So from here, let's talk about how Ancestry actually works with the National Archives. You've probably seen some of the information that has been made available through the National Archives and the communication of their digitization strategy. There are billions and billions of pages of paper records that the National Archives has in its various holdings around the country, whether it's on microfilm or paper, and there are also billions of records in electronic format. Ancestry is interested in those records at the National Archives that have genealogically valuable information. Again, that name and date and place and are key to the records that are interesting for us and the people that come to the Ancestry website. We have a dedicated scanning facility in Maryland, in Silver Spring, where we have built a facility that allows us to digitize paper and accessioned microfilm from the National Archives. So under the supervision of the National Archives, we are able to transport records to this facility where NARA employees oversee the digitization of both microfilm and original paper records. Those are the records then that make it back to the Ancestry website and back in electronic form to the National Archives in a collaboration with the National Archives. We also then have, as NARA has regional facilities around the country, we're able to come in with our cameras and our equipment and trained personnel to digitize records on site at facilities around the country. San Bruno in California and Riverside, California, and NARA Atlanta and NARA Fort Worth and some of the other regions around the country. Within the efforts that we have with the National Archives, officially we started as a digitization partner in 2008, and from that time we have digitized about 144 million images from paper and accessioned microfilm, and this does not include the federal census records. If you take into account federal census records, we are talking about an extra 777 million records from the federal census. And within that, there are, as you can see, about 660 microfilm publications from NARA that we've worked on, and over 462 paper collections that we have digitized through our partnership with the National Archives. So again, for us as an organization, NARA is a key to providing records that are genealogically valuable and of interest to those in family history research. Just a bit more about the way we handle records. We often have people talking about, well, how do you do the imaging and what standards are you following? And on the left are some pictures from the Silver Spring facility that we have where we have secure transportation coming from the National Archives in Archives 1 or Archives 2, coming to our facility in Maryland. And while at that facility, there's a secured vault that only NARA employees have access to, and that's where documents are stored while they wait to be digitized and before they are taken back to NARA after being digitized. At all of the locations that we have, whether it's the facility in Maryland or around the country, there are NARA employees that are overseeing the entire imaging process that our Ancestry staff are involved in. And we follow the NARA document and imaging standards. We have training by NARA employees to keep us correctly updated on the best way to handle documents that are treasures to the nation. And finally, from our point of view, as we work with the National Archives in digitizing genealogically valuable records, it frees up resources for NARA to work on maybe some of the other records that they have interest in digitizing that may not be genealogical. So I think we've found a synergy there for ways to work together and to provide mutual benefit to each of our organizations. Before we get to the next slide, this is where I put my big caveat in and say I'm not a records expert, even though I've been working with Ancestry for about 17 years. I'm not a genealogist and I'm not an archivist, and sometimes I pretend to be, but for the most part I'm not. And as we go through some of the collections that I talk about, you'll be able to probably pick up that I'm not an expert in those areas, but I certainly have a passion for these documents and what they mean to people who do research. And so as you think about questions that you may ask me at the end of this presentation, keep in mind that questions related to ancestry I can almost certainly tackle, but when we come to records, the finer details, I may not have an answer, but if you feel so inclined, ask them anyway. But I hope to be able to provide you the answers you need. So let's jump into the types of long-term projects. These are two examples of some of the long-term projects we have going with the National Archives. The first being immigration records. If you look at that time period, 1820 to about 1957, this is where passenger lists come into play, and probably some of the most important, visually appealing records that we can make available is that passenger list, that arrival list of your ancestor that came to this country. You'll be happy to know that most of those passenger lists from the large ports in the US have already been digitized and are made available on the Ancestry.com website. Almost 140 million of them are, again, already available on Ancestry.com. So the focus we have now is trying to identify some of the smaller ports around the country. If you look at the list there, whether it's Guam or Alaska or Key West in Florida, these are also entry points for people that came into the country. And we go all the way up to about 1963 is when records are open to the public to be viewed in this particular category. And so we're doing a lot of work to try and capture those smaller ports of immigration into the country. And you'll also start to see aeroplane manifests as transportation changed. And you'll then also begin to see repeat trips where travel is now becoming more and more a recreational pursuit or a business pursuit as opposed to purely immigration coming into the country. But really, again, a great collection of passenger lists and arrival records and records of transportation into this country so you can see the comings and goings of your ancestors. If we look over to the right, there are naturalization records, another important focus. The difference between immigration and naturalization being naturalization, the process of becoming a U.S. citizen, and most of the federal records are focused on post-1906. And so there are declarations of intent and petitions for naturalization and military naturalizations. And what we're doing is identifying records around the country at various NARA facilities that have these declarations and petitions, and are trying to bring those to the Ancestry website as well. And to date, we have about 16 million of those from both here in DC in Archives 1 and 2 and from some of the regions around the country. Again, an important record set that provide valuable information to those doing family history research. Okay, so this is where we jump into the specific records, and I'll mention what has been mentioned in some of the previous presentations, is that at all NARA facilities around the country, there's free access to Ancestry.com, and that means that any of the records that I mentioned to you now are freely available at any NARA facility that you visit, and many libraries across the country. And of course, if you want to do this research in your pajamas at 3 o'clock in the morning, then you can simply go to your website, to your laptop, and you can find Ancestry.com there as well. I will also say that a lot of these record examples relate to World War I and World War II. As mentioned earlier, it seems that the war brings out a lot of record keeping, people where they are going and the different stages of entering into a conflict. And so we'll see a lot of records, especially from World War I and World War II. Jumping into the first one, something else I'll say, as I made my final preparations for this presentation, I went onto the Ancestry website and was pleased to see a new feature in the image viewer that we have. We now have a Filmstrip View at the bottom of the screen that allows you to see the images of all of the records in context of that image packet, which was helpful for me as I prepared for this presentation again. And I was happy to see that. So let's talk about the first collection. This is U.S. consular registration certificates from the period about 1907 to 1908. And this was published in 2013 on the Ancestry website. Essentially, U.S. citizens, as they traveled abroad, if they intended to be abroad for a while, consulates asked them to register their residence, tell the consulate where they were, so that the consulate would know where citizens were, and they could also kind of keep tabs on whether or not there was a changing of citizenship that was going to happen, whether a citizen of the U.S. was planning to immigrate to a different country. So some interesting information comes out of these applications. You're saying where you're coming from. You are explaining why you're in this new country and what you're doing there and who's with you. So as we look at some of the images involved, first thing to note on this particular image is that Ethelbert Watts is not the name of the person that's registering. That's the Consul General. Go a line down and you'll see that there's a person, looks like a Jared S. Morgan, that is the person that's registering at this particular consulate in Brussels. Great information like where the person was born, what state in the U.S., and when they arrived in the country that they are now in, and for what purpose. In this particular case, the purpose is business. Some great information follows about those who are with this person. You can see children mentioned there, children and spouse, and where that spouse and children were born and when they were born. So great genealogical information that you may not be able to find in other documents. If we go back one, you'll see again at the bottom of the page, there's a date that indicates exactly when this document was entered into the consulate, which gives you a point in time with some valuable genealogical information that can help in your research. So this is one of the new collections on the Ancestry website. And there's about 82,000 documents in this particular collection. So let's move on to the next one. We look at the U.S. Virgin Islands, and this was an interesting collection, although small, very interesting in that when the U.S. acquired the Virgin Islands in 1917, people in the Virgin Islands then became U.S. citizens, and in order to travel to the U.S., you then had to apply for travel documentation and prove that you were born in the Virgin Islands and that you then qualified for U.S. citizenship. So we see some interesting documents being submitted, and a really fascinating part are the photos that are submitted with these documents as well. So in this particular case, the person applying for the records for the travel documentation was born in St. Thomas in 1903, and he explains that he's a British subject and that he wants to leave St. Thomas for New York, which again is great valuable information. There's a picture, a photograph of this person and an address of where they are. His age is 15 years old, and gives some descriptive information about his hair and his eyes and his weight, or his height and his marks on his face. An interesting bit of information, if you look on the back of this document, he says that my parents were British subjects at the time of my birth until their death a few years ago. And later we learn, if we go back, that he's actually going to New York to visit his stepfather. So there's a story somewhere there in those documents where this young man lost his parents, his birth parents, and was leaving the Virgin Islands to go and visit his stepfather in New York City. Again, a small collection, but a fascinating collection that provides some information to those who emigrated from the Virgin Islands. Some of these records even contain, again, some proof of birth and citizenship in the Virgin Islands and the U.S. In this particular case, a baptismal record is included. Okay, let's look at another collection, the U.S. pardons under amnesty proclamations. This is a Civil War era record from 1865 to 1869. Now, presidential pardons or a general amnesty was allowed for at the end of the Civil War, and even during the Civil War, there was a general amnesty granted. But there were certain classifications of people that, if they wanted amnesty, they had to submit a presidential pardon application, and this is a collection of those. About 13,000 records, and what you find within these records are the name of the individual applying for the pardon, the application date, the application location. Not a lot of personal information, but interesting to note the reasons why presidential pardons were required. Generally, if you were an officer or if you deserted a post in order to join the Confederacy or to join the fight in the Civil War, you then had to apply for this particular pardon. A smaller collection, but one that's interesting as well. Let's head on to the next one. We'll talk about the Washington, D.C. military naturalization petitions. Now, this is around the World War I period, and what's interesting to me about naturalization records in general is that I was born in South Africa and was a South African citizen, and I came to the U.S. and went through that naturalization process, and it was a long, multi-year process with filling out forms again and again and again. The great thing about this collection and these folks were that as you joined the military, you could skip the whole declaration process and jump straight into submitting your petition for naturalization. And most of those folks who did this in the DC area were granted naturalization the same day they applied. So instead of a multi-year period of going through this process, they could do it the same day, and many of them applied while they were in basic training. So all of the great valuable information that comes from a naturalization record can be found in these particular ones. If we look at an image, you will see information about the person themselves and their age and where they were born and what country they were coming from prior to coming to the U.S., information about family members, and again, all of that valuable information that makes the discovery of an ancestor particularly exciting in the naturalization records. And then on the back side, there's often information as well about that they filled out during this petition process. So again, an interesting, and I'm somewhat envious of that speedy process for naturalization, but happy that I went through it, and I'm sure these folks were too. Let's hop on to the next collection. We actually saw this in the previous presentation because these records were scanned in NARA, Atlanta. These are lists of men ordered to report to the local board for military duty. Again, during the World War I period, everyone went through the draft and had to fill out the draft cards, and then as those draft cards were then gathered together, people were selected for service. And each local board then created a list of the people that were, as we can see from the image, of the people that were ordered to report at their local board and what camp they were going to. So as you can see here, the date at which they were ordered to report, which camp they were going to, and then in this particular form, it tells you a bit about the occupation or the industry that they were involved in. In this collection, there are two types of forms, this one and then another one that gives some further detail that actually allows you to see whether or not they did report and when they reported and some steps along the process before they actually boarded the train, because these were the orders to get on the train. As I looked up this collection again and read a bit about the history of this collection, I thought about my own experience in South Africa. Conscription was part of life in South Africa for white South Africans, and I was ordered after high school, as were all of my friends, to report for military duty, for a 2-year term of military duty. And, as in my case, everyone knew that they were going to get an order to report. In this case, people weren't sure and they were drawing names from hats, but I remember receiving with my friends those orders to report and having trepidation and not knowing what I would have ahead of me. Fortunately for me, I had an injury to my thumb from the final rugby game I played in my high school career. And about a month before I was supposed to report at the camp that I was assigned to, I had surgery on my thumb, and they delayed my entry into the military for about 6 months. And it was during that 6-month time period where I had some free time on the beach to think about what I wanted to do. I left South Africa and came to the US and avoided that whole process. 2 years later, they actually did away with transcription, so I guess I didn't miss out too much, but this particular collection made me think about what are the documents that exist around my experience. When I was going through this, was there an order to report where someone then made a note and said, didn't show up, go find him somewhere? I don't know. All I know is I left, and I didn't have to report. Again, a great collection that provides information about whether someone was ordered to report. It doesn't tell you whether they actually reported or not, but at least it tells you whether they were ordered to report. So from the draft to the order to report, you find some continuity in the records related to joining the war effort in World War I. A huge collection, 605,000 records were created from this collection in Atlanta. It's organized by state, by local board, by date, and again, often provides information about their occupation in the records. If you just look at the draft card, this is coming from the microfilm collection that was scanned from the original records in Atlanta. You can see some of the same numbers that help you verify that this draft card relates to this order to report. In the top left-hand corner, there's the number 2505, and you can see on the order to report on the second line down, there's 2505, and then on the draft card circled is 2858, and if you look at the order to report, the order number there, 2858, which gives you confidence that this draft card relates to this particular person on this order to report. Again, great information within the military records of the National Archives. Okay, moving on to another collection, Chelsea, Massachusetts Navy General Register of Patients. Again, a smaller collection, about 13,000 records, but it was published this year in 2014, and it provides the name, age, grade or rank, place of birth, admission and discharge dates, what disease this person had and what ship they came from. And so essentially this is a naval hospital, one of the first of the 3 naval hospitals that Congress authorized for naval personnel. So as people came into this hospital, they were registered, and you can see from the image here, this is the general register of this particular hospital. You can see the admitted dates, when they were enlisted, dates of birth, place of birth, and as we move over to the other side of the large ledger book, everything from remarks on the right-hand side, what happened when they were discharged, and were they discharged back to duty, or were they out of service due to the injuries that they suffered or the sicknesses that they had. Always interesting to look at the reasons why, or the sicknesses that they had. I see some common themes there that thankfully we have reduced in our time, but a fascinating record collection to look at. And then picking up on the same theme, the next collection is U.S. Naval Burial Records. This is where this isn't comprehensive. These provide details on naval personnel that came from some of the ships or some of the hospitals, and where they were buried and where their remains were sent to. So a lot of information about next of kin. If we look at an image, you can see the full name of the person, the rank or the rate, date of birth when it's available, where they died and their cause of death, and when they died. And as we move over to the other half of the page, you can see some more details here on where they were transported to, and their next of kin, which is valuable information to know, name and address of next of kin. So maybe talking about the hidden gems, or what I see as some of the interesting collections that you may not have seen before, either because they were published a while ago or because they were a little bit more obscure than some of the larger collections. Let's start out by looking. This is actually the first collection that we digitized from paper at the National Archives in 2008. And these are the reports of deaths of American citizens abroad. So as I mentioned earlier, a consulate asked American citizens if they were staying in that country to report their whereabouts. And this is a database that the consulates kept when an American died. If they knew an American died abroad, they would fill out a form explaining all of the details, because often this was the only place where a death certificate was kept. So in some cases, if we look at the images, this is the report of death form, and sometimes these files contain the death certificate of that country, so you'll find that in the language of that country. But it provides a lot of information about next of kin, about family members, about how they died and what they died of, where they were living, how old they were, all of the rich information that helps in making those fabulous discoveries about your ancestors. Interesting about this collection is there are a lot of famous people and infamous people in these reports. I have on my computer some pictures of Bruce Lee's report of death in Hong Kong, and then you can find some of the conspiracy theories where some documents were filled out to report the death of Amelia Earhart at the hands of some people that thought that there was some conspiracy theory hiding why she really died. Famous people. This isn't only people that were in active. This does not include people that were in active military service. Those are all part of the records kept by the other parts of government. These are civilians living and visiting, and then unfortunately died while abroad. And often this is the only proof of American death that occurred. Again, one of my favorite collections, and in this particular case, there is a certificate of death from the local register office. Another gem that I'd like to point out is descriptive lists of colored volunteer Army soldiers. For those that are doing African American research, you're all too familiar with the challenge of trying to identify or get records of African Americans. This particular collection is wonderful because if we look at an image, not only does it provide all of the regular information about that you would expect in an army list or a list of muster or enlistment, but it also provides, if you look on the far right-hand side, the name of the slave owner, if they were previously a slave. And again, as people doing African American research know, this is an important link that can help in your family history research. So again, for me, a valuable collection in doing African American research. Okay, with the few minutes that are left, let's talk about some of these sneak peeks or coming attractions. I will say that between the time that I put this presentation together and now, some of these collections have come to the website already, so not so much a sneak peek, but go and take a look at them. The first one being War Department press releases and related records. Now, you wouldn't think that a press release would be interesting to family history, but I'll tell you that I was fascinated by reading these. I read a few just to get some context to this particular database, and I really couldn't stop reading. Essentially, the War Department, as soldiers came back and were either in a hospital or had come home, the War Department sent out people to interview them. Those stories were then compiled in a press release and sent to the local newspapers and asked them to publish them in an effort to build up morale and to highlight the service of these dedicated soldiers. So fascinating reading. This is not the image that's on our website. This is an image that we took when we were researching this particular collection. But it's a story that if that was my ancestor and I could read the details of their service, fascinating information. I love this collection. Again, press releases explaining the war effort around the Second World War. Let's look at another collection that we just released to the website as well. This is the Tennessee Valley Authority. Now, as the Tennessee Valley Authority, or in the Tennessee Valley area, there was a lot of flooding. And so the government decided to build some dams, and in that process, they needed to relocate some people. So again, a fascinating example of the government going out and interviewing people, finding out what the local living situation was for this particular house that was in the middle of a floodplain, and talking to the family, finding out a bit about their life and how they lived and how long they'd been there and who they were related to, and then writing that up in a family history document for me to read that explains this particular family and why they were there. And sometimes you'll see the negotiations of the government with these individuals of how much should I pay to help you relocate to a safer area. And sometimes you'll find photos of the house that they were hoping to relocate, and then a picture of the house that they moved to. So again, if this is your ancestor and you find information in this particular collection, just a gold mine of rich stories that help in your family history research. I think what I'll do is I'll jump to, and I don't have a slide for this, but there are a couple of other collections worth mentioning that two that were just released to the website. One is a collection from NARA called the ID Cards of Prohibition Agents. Visually, just a great, appealing collection. These are the little books that these prohibition agents kept in their pockets, I'm assuming. And as they went around doing their business, they took out these little books and flashed their photo and their badge, showing that they were a prohibition agent. Well, we've digitized those collections, and this is 1920 to 1925. We've made those available on the website and are fascinating to look at. Probably the largest, or one of the largest projects we've ever undertaken with the National Archives, we started a few months ago. And this is the scanning of World War II draft cards. Most of you may be familiar with the fourth registration, or the old man's draft, and these are draft cards for people born between 1877 and 1897. We have some of those on our website already, but we have an effort to scan all of those. Those are all being scanned in St. Louis, Missouri, under the supervision of NARA. But not only are we going to complete the scanning of the World War II draft cards, but we are also going to scan the first set of the young man's draft cards. These are people who entered the draft between the years, birth years 1897 to about 1929. And we are looking at about 60 million images that are being digitized in St. Louis. And we hope to start having that come to the website over the next few years. A large collection, a big collection, and this is a collection that maybe your grandfather is in, or maybe your father is in, and you can take a look at that draft card and see the information that they entered as they drafted for military service in World War II. So I've raced through that. I'll throw my caveat again. I'm not a records expert, but I certainly love the records of the National Archives and the rich stories that can be found in those records. And so I now open it up to questions that may come.
Thank you so much, Quinton. That was a fascinating overview of Ancestry.com, and we appreciate your time here. We were furiously trying to keep up with all the questions that we received through YouTube chat. So let's start with the first one on DNA. The question is, if someone has questions about their DNA results, where can they learn more?
That's a great question. I have questions about my DNA results. Luckily, I can walk down the hallway and ask some of my colleagues, and what they have done as well, knowing that this can be a complicated topic, there are great resources on the Ancestry website. Almost every facet of that Ancestry DNA result that you get back, there are answers on the website and explanations on the website that help you understand what you are seeing. There were some fun parts to what I saw when I first viewed my results, and there were some questions that I had. And I started reading, and I was able to talk with my colleagues, and there's a lot of information on the website that will help you understand a bit more about the results that you're getting.
Thank you, Quinton. Our next question is about process. The question is, why am I unable to locate certain people in the Ancestry search when they show up in other website searches in the same database? Example, 1870 U.S. Census.
That's a great question and not an uncommon question. If you look across the various websites that provide genealogical information for you to research, each website has their own methods for digitizing records and then their own algorithms and search technology. So sometimes as you type in a name that you are searching for and you may find it in one versus another, I encourage you to do that, to search in multiple locations, to search wherever you can for your ancestor, because different eyes view images in different ways. As we take a handful of people together to interpret a document, especially when it's handwritten, I will see something that someone else may not see, or we will view things differently, or image quality may be different in one version of a record set versus another. So I certainly encourage people to go broad and to do as much researching as they can.
Thank you, Quinton. Because we received so many questions, we thought this would be a good question to ask you at this time. Do you have a general email address for Ancestry that people could continue to ask more questions when you're done with your presentation?
I'm trying to think of the best place to ask questions. It really depends on what you're asking about. If you're asking about our relationship with the National Archives and what we do and some of the record sets we have, then there's an email address, content@ancestry.com. But if you're asking questions about DNA, for example, or Family Tree Maker, some software that we have, or your account on the website, then I would encourage people to go to the website, and there are multiple places where you can get specific answers to your specific request. If there are things within this presentation that you want answers to, that you've thought about, then by all means email that content@ancestry.com website email address, and we'll be able to address your questions there.
Thank you so much. Our next question, how does one go about submitting records to Ancestry?
I'm I'm trying to think of exactly what is meant by that question, so maybe I'll answer in both ways and hopefully cover what you are intending there. If you are using the website and you see information on the website that you would like to add to or maybe provide insight into, maybe an error that you've seen or a different version of a name, many of the databases on the left-hand side of the page will have an add comment or add some additional information. You can then submit the additional information that you have or the correction you want to suggest, and that's a way that you can submit information to Ancestry. If the question is more related to how can I take the records that I have and publish them on Ancestry, in general, the best way to take what you know and you have and make it available on Ancestry is to create an online family tree where you can upload as many photos and documents as you want to about your ancestors, and you can decide whether you want to share that with the broader community on Ancestry or not. Hopefully I've answered the question in one of those two answers.
Thank you for taking time to answer in both ways. This next question from YouTube, and this is a viewer who's watching from Guam. Their question is, will civil records be added anytime soon?
I'm assuming that this person's interested in civil records from Guam. I'm not sure, but we are adding records from around the world, and not only do we focus on government records that are kept by the National Archives, but we certainly work with civil institutions to publish birth, death, and marriage records. We have released some records from Guam over the last year. As I mentioned in my presentation, almost 1 billion records from 67 different countries have been released in 2014. So there's an ongoing effort to provide records from across the globe, and certainly civil records, or in other words, birth, death, and marriage records are a valuable part of that broadening of access to records.
Okay, thank you. We have another content question. Are there any plans to digitize any naturalization records for people who immigrated pre-1906?
Great question, great record set, and the answer absolutely is yes. We actually have on the website lots and lots of pre-1906 naturalization records. We have a large collection from New York that we digitized from the NARA office in New York City. So there are already New York pre-1906 naturalization records on the website. And certainly there's an ongoing effort to acquire, where we can, pre-1906 naturalization records. Again, I have a particular affinity to these records because of my own process, and I know how rich they can be, and most valuable records we'll be pursuing around the country from pre-1906 period.
Thank you for that answer. Our next set of questions has to deal with those records that are not in English. The first question is, how does Ancestry plan to handle records not in English, those from the Philippines, France, or French Canadian, Poland, etc.?
You'll be happy to know that on our website there are lots of these records already, so you can actually take a look and see how we're handling them. I'll summarize it by saying that we still digitize what we see. We digitize the document, and then we create indexes from what we see on that document. So we don't change the words that we see on the document, but we do provide English versions of headings or giving you an indication of whether this is the name or the date or the place or the relationship, and we'll provide some of that information in English. You can also go to our localized or local language website. So if you're interested in German records, we just released millions of German records last week. You can go to the German website, ancestry.de, and view and have an immersed German experience with the records, with the website, with the searching. Or you can go to ancestry.com, the English version or the US version, and you can see those exact same records, the exact same information, but there will be finding tools that are in English that will help you to try and make sense of some of the more challenging languages.
Thank you. With so many new immigrants from Asia in recent years, are there plans to digitize and make available documents from countries like India, particularly documents from temples?
Wow, There is never a shortage of records and collections we can pursue. I was in Spain a couple of weeks ago for the International Council of Archives conference, and we actually met with the archivist for India, and they have interest in digitizing records. Will Ancestry be pursuing those this year? Probably not. Will we have sights on trying to help them digitize records in the future? Probably. But we obviously cannot do everything. But we're trying to focus on those records that are most important to those in the US, and then broadening out to some of the other international markets that we can pursue at this time.
Thank you. That's fascinating. Our next question: are there any plans for more records from North Dakota prior to 1900?
You'll be happy to know that no matter what state, every single state, we have efforts in trying to digitize and gain access to records. So if North Dakota is your area of interest, we have people that are interested and are working with the state archives in North Dakota and the state vital record office in North Dakota and county archives in that state as well. So we really are not, there is no state in the US where we do not have efforts to try and make available records from that state. So if you don't have your records now, then what I would say is stay tuned, because we have ongoing efforts across the country to make available as many records as we can.
Thank you, Quinton. If you have a moment, can you answer general subscription questions? We have several under that category.
I can try. Happy to try.
Okay, let's start with the first one. Are there different subscription accesses for the different markets? Do I get access to these other market records?
Yes, I'll start by answering if I'm in the US, which I am, and I go to the Ancestry.com website, I can first of all either sign up for a monthly subscription or I can sign up for a 6-month subscription. So there's those two choices. Within that, I can decide to have access to only US records, and there's a certain price monthly and 6 months for that. Or I can have access to all the records across all global entities, and that's the World Explorer package. And again, I can sign up for a month or 6 months for that. Then there's a third option in the US where you can do everything in the world, plus some of our other properties like newspapers and Fold 3. Now, if I'm in the UK, for example, I can go to the UK website and I can do something similar. I can sign up just for UK records, or I can sign up for everything in the world. Or if I'm in Germany, I can sign up just for German records or everything in the world. I will say also, no matter really where you are, depending on which collection you're interested in, you can get just that collection for that country if you want, or you can get everything across the world and get access to wherever your research takes you.
Oh, very good. Thank you. We have 2 more questions regarding subscriptions. What is the difference between Ancestry Library Edition and a subscription to Ancestry.com?
Great question. Primary difference is that the Ancestry Institution version does not have some of the personalization features that you would in your home account. So as an example, message boards or creating an online tree. We've set up Ancestry Institution so that if it's set up at a library terminal, people can just come in and out and get access to Ancestry without the risk of leaving any personal information on that computer. So that's the primary difference. In terms of content, there are a handful of differences that probably not even worth mentioning, but for the most part, content is the same. The personal experience may be a little bit different, but that's all for the sake of security and protecting personal information.
Thank you. And our last question for the day: do you need to have a paid subscription to view a tree on Ancestry?
I think the answer is no. I can create my own tree, and I don't need to have an account for that, and I can decide whether or not I want to share that tree or not. If you find that is different and your experience is different, then please do send an email to that content at Ancestry account, and I can dig into that more. But to be honest, it's been a while since I've paid for an Ancestry account, just part of what I do. But if my answer is wrong there, then please contact that email address and I can look into that more.
Thank you so much for your time, Quinton. That is the end of our session with Quinton Atkinson. If the speaker did not get to your question, please send an email for the Ancestry.com questions to content@ancestry.com. We will now have a short intermission.